Lance Cade, born Lance McNaughton in Carroll, Iowa, was a professional wrestler who spent most of his career with the WWE and its developmental promotions, as well as a handful of tours to Japan. As a graduate of the Shawn Michaels Wrestling Academy in 1999, he briefly worked for Frontier Martial Arts in the first year of his career, and in 2001 would sign with the WWE. Throughout the next couple of years, he would continue improving his craft in its developmental territory, Ohio Valley Wrestling, but being skilled in the ring would prove not to be enough to reach the next level of his career. When it came to his physical appearance, Lance didn't fit into the stereotypical bodybuilder look that became a requirement in the WWE and was pressured to use steroids in order to fit in. He made his on-camera debut in 2003, and by June of that year was promoted to the Raw brand under the ring name Garrison Cade. Over the next 5 years, he became a regular on the main roster, teaming with both Trevor Murdoch and Chris Jericho, and becoming a 3-time tag team champion. In 2008, he suffered a seizure on a plane, requiring emergency medical care. Lance, like many other performers in the WWE, would rely on a cocktail of prescription medications, as well as performance enhancers, in order to meet the high demands placed on them by the company. Realizing he had a problem, he eventually reached out to the company and took advantage of their wellness policy, which offered to pay for rehab to any performer past or present suffering from addiction. 6 weeks later, he was released from his WWE contract. Many fans believe the WWE acted too harsh on Lance. He was rehired by the company in 2009, appearing in one of its developmental territories, Florida Championship Wrestling, but was released in 2010 without returning to the main roster. In August of that year, Lance passed away at the age of 29, reported as an accidental drug overdose. At the same time, Linda McMahon was deep in her campaign run to become U.S. Senator. Among several other controversies during her crusade, when asked about Lance's untimely passing, she would go on to say the WWE had no more responsibility for its talent than the studio Heath Ledger worked for at the time of his death. She would also downplay their relationship, and was quoted as saying she didn't really know him and might have met him once. According to Lance's father, Harley, he witnessed Linda having interactions with Lance at more than one WWE event and was furious by her comments, as well felt Linda disrespected Lance and his entire family. During an interview, Christopher Nowinski described Linda's comments as kicking dirt on his grave. As a publicly traded company, history shows corporate profits typically come before the well-being of their performers. With a career that picked up steam so quickly, no one was expecting Lance's death to arrive so abruptly. This is a story of Lance Cade.
Original wrestling documentaries. What the world has come to.
You knew Lance Cade, yes?
Yes.
And he dies this week, not the first death in your former profession or whatever you call it. Aberrational or part of a pattern?
No, certainly part of a pattern. I mean, he had a drug addiction to painkillers. He was a steroid user. I mean, I remember seeing him, last time I saw him was at the Garden in Boston. He was in catering and he said, you know, I wish I had a gimmick like yours. Me being the Ivy League guy, who I could just talk. I didn't have to have a big steroid body. So he said, so I could stop using these steroids. And he also said because the pressure is to use them because the WWE rewards the guys who use them.
Now, do the people who run the WWE, they know all this is going on? Do they encourage all this?
I mean, they absolutely know what's going on.
Linda McMahon is quoted in the last couple of days as saying, I should be held no more accountable than a studio which failed to prevent Heath Ledger's death, obviously from a drug overdose in 08. What kind of response do you have to that?
That's complete garbage. And when I read that, that's one of the reasons I agreed to talk about this. I haven't been talking about this. For the guys I knew, and she says, well, her quote in the paper was, I might have met Lance once. Just kicking dirt on the guy's grave. They have an environment where it's absolutely unsafe to work in that ring. They have no oversight into what actually happens in the ring, and they are encouraging steroid use. It gives you an enlarged heart, which is why guys are dying from heart failure. They're taking painkillers wrestlers because they're working 200 nights a year and getting hit, unlike anyone in the history of the wrestling business. It wasn't like that in the 80s. It wasn't like that in the 70s. You're falling. I mean, I used to go through tables for 4 days a week.
So I'll put words. Linda McMahon is completely full of it when she says what she says about either not knowing or that this is like a studio. I mean, a studio it's not part of their deal to have their actors taking drugs. It is part of what you do to succeed, or did, yes?
It's part of what some of the guys do to succeed. And also,
I don't mean you.
If you are an actor, you have stunt people that prevent you from getting permanent injuries.
When I found his body, it was the worst day of my life. No parent should ever have to make funeral arrangements for their own child. It's just not right. He was only 29. He had his whole life ahead of him. The McMahon family and that whole WWE circus needs to be investigated. You can say wellness policy this or that, but until a tragedy happens, no one even cares. These men and women travel on the road with no off-season or time to let their bodies heal, and all the company cares about is profits. How many of their wrestlers have died in the last 5 or 10 years? Not to mention the families and kids they leave behind. Lance was a father. He had 2 beautiful daughters and a stepson, who are always going to grow up asking, why did my daddy have to die so young? I'll tell you that Linda or Vince McMahon would be acting a lot different if they got a phone call and it was Shane or Stephanie laying in the morgue.
Lance was born on March 2nd, 1981 in Carroll, Iowa, to Harley and Jay McNaughton. From the first time he saw Shawn Michaels and Ric Flair in action, he became a lifelong wrestling fan and knew instantly that's what he wanted to do. He was a standout athlete and excelled in many sports he tried, from golf to basketball. By the time he was 12 or 13 years old, he was already making local newspapers. Lance attended Millard North High School, and already over 6 feet was an obvious choice for the basketball team. He was the best player they had and helped them win many games, but couldn't get wrestling off his mind.
In high school, he was on the basketball team. He was already 6'4", but ever since he was old enough to talk, all he would talk about is wrestling.
While spending his days training in the weight room with the football team, he made up his mind that's what he wanted to do, either become a basketball player or a pro wrestler. With offers from several colleges for scholarships on the table, Lance found out about Shawn Michaels Wrestling School and declined them all, and at 18, he packed his bags and moved to San Antonio, Texas, where he would train alongside future WWE stars Daniel Bryan and Brian Kendrick. Lance immediately caught the attention of Shawn Michaels as a potential star for the future. He was an 18-year-old kid who stood 6'5" and had the look Vince McMahon looked for in a top star.
I don't regret his decision to become a wrestler, because that was his dream from childhood. He loved the business.
Daniel Bryan talked about Lance Cade in his book. Lance caught Shawn's eye from the very beginning. He was a big guy from Nebraska, tall, muscular, and athletic. He was good looking too, with his long blonde hair, and only 18 at the time. That first day of training, among all the calisthenics and rolls, we also did something involving jumping. Lance could jump to the moon, and when Shawn saw him jump so high, he immediately said in front of everyone, "I smell money." It was clear that Lance was one of Shawn's early favorites. Alongside Shawn Michaels, Lance also would receive training from Rudy Gonzalez and the legendary Jose Lothario. Lance was at the top of his class and would make his in-ring debut in Shawn's local promotion, Texas Wrestling Alliance, where he started out as a planted fan, interfering in matches. When Bruce Pritchard came down to the school to scout talent for the WWF, he signed 4 students from the class: Shooter Schultz, Brian Kendrick, Daniel Bryan, and Lance. According to Bruce Pritchard, Lance was very quiet and shy and would second guess and overanalyze everything. He never really connected with the fans. He was great in the ring and had the look that looked like he should be the champion, but unfortunately just overanalyzed everything. Lance would go to Japan with Daniel Bryan, who was now calling himself the American Dragon. There they would work together as a tag team. The next month, Daniel Bryan left Japan and headed back to the United States. Lance returned to the United States and went back to the Texas Wrestling Academy, where he won the TV championship title. He left Texas Wrestling Academy in June of 2000 and went to Memphis Championship Wrestling, where he would have several matches with Daniel Bryan, who's still calling himself the American Dragon. In August of 2001, he was sent to Heartland Wrestling Association, which at the time was a developmental promotion for the WWE run by Les Thatcher. There he formed a team with Mike Sanders and became a 3-time Heartland Wrestling Tag Team Champion and a 2-time Heartland Wrestling Heavyweight Champion. On June 22, 2002, Lance wrestled a dark match at a WWE Raw house show where he defeated Johnny Stamboli. Backstage during a meeting with Jim Ross, Lance was told he needed to work on his upper body and again felt pressure to use performance enhancement drugs, as making the main roster was a dream of Lance's since he was a little kid. Jim Ross liked Lance both as a person and as a performer. Unlike Bruce Pritchard, Jim Ross could see the potential Lance had and the star he could be. World Wrestling Entertainment was ending their agreement with Heartland Wrestling and withdrew all their signed developmental talent. Lance was one of those wrestlers. His last match for HWA was in July of 2002 when he lost the heavyweight title to Cody Hawk. Lance then went to Ohio Valley Wrestling and continued to fine-tune his craft. He teamed with Rene Dupree and they became a tag team stable known as Bolin Services, with Kenny Bolin as their manager. Lance and Dupree fought for an opportunity for the OVW tag team titles, both against Bradshaw in a handicap match and against the APA, but came up short. On November 11th of 2002, he would make another WWE appearance during a dark match on Sunday Night Heat when he teamed with Charlie Haas, defeating Chris Kanyon and Danny Basham. Jim Ross was impressed with Lance's progress and dedication to the business and was heavily praised for his performance, but was told he still needed to build his body. He began making regular appearances on WWE Raw house shows as well as Heat. With only a few hours' notice, Lance was told that because he would be facing Lance Storm, he would have to change his name that he had been using for 4 years at that point. Lance was not thrilled about the moniker change, but trying to be a team player and willing to make any sacrifice required for his career, he reluctantly changed his name. On June of 2003, Lance wrestled his first televised Raw show against Lance Storm, wrestling as Garrison Cade. As Storm got the upper hand, he was interrupted by Stone Cold Steve Austin. Stone Cold stood under the Titantron, calling Storm boring throughout the match. Throughout June and July, he would have several matches against Storm and even form a short-lived tag team with Tough Enough winner Maven. Lance managed to reach the big stage of the WWE in a very short time and seemed to have a promising career ahead of him. He would then form a team with Mark Jindrak and have several matches against the Dudley Boys. They would remain a team for the rest of 2003 and until March of the next year. Lance would begin wrestling more as a singles performer, but also formed several short-lived tag teams teaming with Chuck Palumbo, Johnny Nitro, and even Jonathan Coachman. WWE wasn't sure what to do with Lance. As great as a performer he was in the ring, fans were still unable to connect with his persona, and he was sent back to OVW to work on his character. He was called back up for a Sunday Night Heat dark match on July 18, 2005, where he teamed with Trevor Rhodes, who would change his name to Trevor Murdoch because of his uncanny resemblance to the veteran Dick Murdoch. The next night during a WWE Raw house show, him and Murdoch would defeat Chris Cage and The Miz and would again be known as Lance Cade. Lance and Murdoch not only had chemistry in the ring, but outside as well. The two quickly became close friends and traveling with one another. WWE immediately noticed how well they worked together. Lance played the role of a smooth-talking cowboy, while Murdoch was depicted as an angry southern trucker. Over the next 3 years, the two would capture the tag team titles on 3 separate occasions. In an exclusive interview with Slam Wrestling, Trevor Murdoch spoke about his partner and best friend Lance. Murdoch's wife called Lance the other woman, since they spent so much time together and would call each other on days off as well, eager to discuss ideas they had for their characters. 90% of the time, it was just me and him, Murdoch said. If I got to a town before he did, I'd wait for him, and we'd get a rental car. If he got there before me, he would wait for me. It was a strong partnership, and not just a partnership, but a friendship. Initially, Lance was asked to choose between Murdoch, fresh from Harley Race's wrestling school, and Kevin Thorne, who he had known in the WWE's developmental system. Murdoch's unique look appealed to Lance, and they clicked, sharing a deep passion for the business. Murdoch would go on to say, WWE thought they were putting two guys together so they could make $1 million. What they didn't know is they were putting two guys together that became best friends. Upon teaming up, Murdoch and Lance quickly won the WWE World Tag Team Championship, but politics and physical attributes led to some up and down booking in their respective careers. Murdoch explained how their title run was pulled away for no reason and didn't get an explanation at the time, but noted they had later found out it was due to an argument with the head producer. Later on, Murdoch said he and Lance were pulled off television, and while they kept throwing out ideas to WWE to bring themselves back, they continued to be rejected. When asking for an explanation why, Murdoch said the writing team told him it was due to Vince McMahon and a particular issue related to the duo's appearance. Murdoch would go on, "We sat down with Vince, Lance on one side, I'm on the other, and we just asked him outright, the writers are throwing ideas at you, we're throwing ideas at you, and you keep shooting us down. What is it that you're not happy with when it comes to us?" And he pulled down his glasses, looked at both of us, and he looked at Lance, who had black hair at the time, and he goes, "I hate your fake black hair." And he looked at me and he goes, "I don't like your pasty white skin." The next day, I'm tan and my partner's got bleach blonde hair. Sure enough, Vince gets a picture of it. Next week we're on TV. On December 28, 2007, Lance separated his shoulder at a house show in Atlanta and was inactive for the next month. His painkiller addiction began to kick in full force, as a constant fear of losing his spot on the main roster forced him to return much sooner than he should have.
Lance had been injured on the job, requiring surgery on a shoulder in 2009 and receiving a prescription for a knee injury in 2004. Once you try to climb the ladder and get a spot, you shut it down due to an injury, and you lose your spot and go right back down to the bottom. So it's, here, take a few painkillers, make the world go away. After injuries, use of painkillers just came too easy to Lance because it took the pain away. The use of the painkillers made it like he was in La La Land. He would just kind of pass out.
Lance made his return teaming with Murdoch on the February 4th episode of Raw in a losing effort to Bob Holly and Cody Rhodes. In April of 2008, Trevor Murdoch began to develop a country singing gimmick. On the May 12th episode of Raw, Lance turned on Murdoch, punching Murdoch in the face twice, ending the partnership. The two faced off on the June 2nd, 2008 edition of Raw, with Lance getting the victory to end their feud. By September of 2008, Lance moved on to storylines involving Chris Jericho and Shawn Michaels. His WWE career seemed to be on the rise as he was being booked in more high-profile matches. On the September 22nd episode of Raw, Lance would team up with Chris Jericho and Bradshaw, facing Batista and Shawn Michaels in a handicap match. Lance's team would win the match when he scored his clean pinfall on his former trainer and mentor Shawn Michaels. After the match, Lance left the arena abruptly without thanking Shawn, which violated rookie etiquette, as someone considered Shawn passing the torch to Lance, as Shawn pushed him very heavily to WWE management. On the September 29th edition of Raw, Lance and Chris Jericho would face Shawn Michaels and Triple H and would lose via disqualification. After the match, when Lance returned backstage, he faced an angry Vince McMahon, who was furious over Lance's performance and didn't think he was taking his push seriously enough. The next week, on October 6th, in a no disqualification match with Michaels on Raw, Lance was beaten down with one brutal chair shot after another and left for dead in the middle of the ring, and it turns out it was punishment. The punishment was for not having shown enough gratitude to Michaels, who had gifted Lance with a pinfall win over him in the prior match. This took place nearly a year after Vince McMahon told CNN in a fall 2007 documentary that WWE was banning chair shots to the head.
Standpoint is just don't use chairs to the head.
This would be Lance's last appearance on WWE television. The next 2 matches Lance had were house shows against D'Lo Brown.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention please as we go through the following safety instructions.
On October 13th, 2008, during a commercial flight from San Bernardino, California to Puerto Rico for another WWE house show, Lance suffered a seizure on the plane during the journey. The airline attendants didn't recognize Lance and had no way of knowing what caused the seizure. Lillian Garcia, who was traveling on the same flight, told him his name and informed them that he was a professional wrestler and saw to it that he made it to the hospital. He was rushed to the hospital and still incoherent when he arrived. He underwent a series of tests because the medical staff wasn't sure whether the seizure was caused by an athletic injury as opposed to drug-related. At the hospital, they determined the seizure was caused by an overdose of pain medication. The feeling was that because the incident occurred in public and became a life-and-death situation, it warranted a punishment more severe than the standard wellness policy suspensions. Generally, WWE would suspend wrestlers who are found abusing prescription drugs for 30 to 60 days. However, considering the abuse in Cade's case resulted in a potentially life-threatening seizure, they decided to terminate his contract as they felt the situation was much more grave than any others they had dealt with in the past. The persisting heat apparently wasn't over the drug-induced seizure, but Vince blowing up backstage a few weeks earlier at him for not taking his role seriously enough throughout the nervy performance during the Raw main event with DX. Shawn took it personal when Lance stormed out of the building, forgetting to thank him for the tag match. And because of Shawn's close relationship with McMahon's son-in-law Triple H, it didn't take long for word to reach the boss. In an October 2008 blog post, WWE commentator Jim Ross shed some light on Lance's sudden departure from the WWE. He would write, "Lance Cade was abruptly released from his contract this week, much to the surprise of many of us. I've always thought that Lance had a wealth of physical potential, and he was always a polite young man in my dealings with him. Like many fans, I did my share of armchair quarterbacking as to why Lance was not featured in a more prominent role on WWE TV programming. However, it seemed that the past several weeks those issues were being addressed, even to the point of Lance defeating HBK on a recent Monday Night Raw. The story I read on many internet sites about the reason for Lance's sudden dismissal isn't accurate. Many pundits speculate that Lance was dismissed because of a bad performance in a recent TV bout against DX on Raw, which is absolutely untrue. Lance's dismissal had zero to do with his in-ring performance or his lack of ability. Lance Cade was dismissed from WWE because, like many humans, he made a major league mistake while utilizing bad judgment that cost him his job. This included Lance having a seizure on an airplane and having to have emergency medical care. Luckily, Lillian Garcia was on the same flight and was instrumental in helping Lance get taken to the hospital, where a battery of tests were run that luckily determined that there was nothing seriously wrong with the young man, such as a brain tumor. Everyone makes mistakes. Lord knows I have made plenty in my career, but in this day and time some mistakes simply just can't be condoned. To some fans, Lance Cade will still likely be perceived as a victim in this matter and his punishment too harsh. Under the circumstances of the situation, I don't know what other decision WWE could have made. I'm just relieved it wasn't me in my former role that would have had to address this matter. I really like this kid and hope that he continues to follow his dreams. Second chances are not foreign in the wrestling business, so perhaps that could be in Lance's future, but that's just a personal observation. Lance Cade is a talented young man whose best days should be ahead of him, and I wish him nothing but success. Lance has been knocked down and now it's time for him to get off the canvas and get back in the game. I'm damn sure pulling for him. Upon his WWE release, Lance dedicated spending more time with his family and would also reunite with his partner Trevor Murdoch, making appearances in the NWA, as well as returning to Japan in December of that year, teaming with his former tag team partner Rene Dupree for Hustle on December 24th and 25th. They appeared as masked wrestlers Dinah and Mike Sharp, a parody of the Sharp brothers. But even though Lance was back in the ring full time, he was halfway across the world and thousands of miles away from his kids. This would be the first time not being home for Christmas. He chalked it up as being part of the business, but like all the injuries he was working through, he just numbed his feelings with more prescription drugs. Throughout the first half of 2009, he would spend most of his time in Japan, and in September he would face Rob Van Dam in a losing effort in Portugal for the WSW heavyweight title. In October, Lance would re-sign with the WWE and would be sent to Florida Championship Wrestling. But unfortunately, Lance's painkiller addiction had gotten worse over the previous year, as he was splitting his time between the NWA and long tours to Japan. When John Laurinaitis told him in mid-December that they were finally ready to bring him up to the main roster from FCW, Lance, showing rigorous honesty, admitted to Laurinaitis that he was struggling through painkiller withdrawal on his own, which led to him being unable to sleep. This subsequently led Lance to becoming addicted to sleeping pills as well, so he asked to go to drug rehabilitation, which he successfully completed in February of 2010. Laurinaitis assured Lance he would have a spot for him on the roster when he completed treatment. 6 weeks later, and after passing several drug tests for the WWE, he was released from his contract, with no explanation given. Shawn Michaels told him he was done as a WWE wrestler and would never be used as a main eventer by the company. After being with the company for a decade and injuring himself over and over, proving he would do anything asked to him by Vince McMahon, he was wished well on his future endeavors.
What got to me more was the notion that he had done the right thing in seeking out rehab to overcome his addiction, continued to pass drug tests, and yet been released by the WWE nevertheless. They tested him from the toe to the top of his head. He passed those tests, only to be released anyway. After he gets out of rehab, what is it now? He embarrassed you? Is that what it is? Don't tell me that you care about these people. Lance would have cut his arm off for Vince McMahon, but it wasn't there in return. He don't care any more than the man in the moon for them, other than his dollar signs.
Lance wouldn't stay unemployed for long. Shortly after, he would sign with All Japan Pro Wrestling, and the next month again would be making grueling trips to Japan. Because of the difference in culture and the way addiction and recovery is viewed in Japan, it was impossible for Lance to stay off the pain medication and sleeping pills, and began using even heavier than he did before rehab. Lance would comment during an interview with Kenny Bolin in May of 2010. "Here I am, the first active wrestler under contract with him that asked for help, and ending up talking to Shawn Michaels 6 weeks after I did that, and him pretty much telling me I'm done. It's like, well, geez, you guys really do care about your talent, don't you?" Here I made a pretty grown-up decision, for all the positive things in my life, my family, myself, and of course my career, to benefit everybody, and they take that as a bad thing. His last match was in Japan on July 4th. Lance was eager to return to the States and see his family. During the second week of August, it was reported that family members believed there was something wrong with Lance, including his wife Tanya, who noticed he didn't look healthy and that he was having trouble breathing. Lance was rushed to the hospital in the evening of Tuesday, August the 10th, and was released the next day. His father, Harley, noticed that Lance showed up to his work on August the 12th and was not looking good at all. After a series of unanswered phone calls, he went to Lance's home and discovered his son's lifeless body. According to the San Antonio Medical Examiner, Lance passed away from mixed intoxication, complicating a cardiomyopathy. When Dave Meltzer reported on Lance's death, he received a call from Vince McMahon because he originally thought Lance Storm had passed away. Around this time, Linda McMahon would be deep on the campaign trail in her attempt to gain a seat in the U.S. Senate. She didn't shy away from her past as CEO of the WWE, even highlighting her experience with the company in campaign ads. But the death of Lance and the lingering questions about the WWE's work practices threatened to turn the association into a negative one. During her run, Linda McMahon was known as a candidate who kicks men in the crotch and runs an operation where women are forced to bark like dogs. When asked about Lance's untimely passing, Linda McMahon said the company can no more be held accountable for his death than a studio that could have prevented Heath Ledger's death, referring to the actor who died of a drug overdose in 2008. Who knows what causes people to have addictions, and do what they do, McMahon said. She would also go on to say she hardly knew Lance and might have met him once.
Linda McMahon is a bold-faced liar. I've been with him on 2 different WWE functions where she came up to him and knew him by name. She disrespected him. She disrespected the whole family.
During an interview with That's Wrestling, Trevor Murdoch would comment as he broke out in tears. "It breaks my heart every day. I think an addiction took control of his life, and he fought that addiction, and he did everything he could." Trevor Murdoch admitted they frequently talked about the problem. According to a 2014 study by Eastern Michigan University examining professional wrestlers who were active between 1985 and 2011, mortality rates were almost 3 times greater. Experts suggest that a combination of the physical nature of the business, no off-season, and potentially high workload, with some fighting more than 200 matches per year, along with the drug culture in the business, contribute to the high mortality rates. The concept of untimely deaths of the professional wrestlers was a frequent topic of discussion on the Opie and Anthony show. Lance Cade was proficient in the ring, good on the mic, and as passionate about the wrestling business as he was about life itself. He represents a dark side of wrestling's big bright show, a side that few want to acknowledge, particularly not Vince and Linda McMahon. After a decade of dedication to the company, sacrificing his body, his health, and eventually his life, he has been forgotten by the WWE and never mentioned again publicly by the corporation. That was the story of Lance Cade.